Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you as a scientometrician, but also as an engineer. My background is in electrical engineering. As you might know, Scientometrics is the study of science by scientific means, as proposed by Derek de Solla Price about 45 years ago. There are about 300 scientometricians on this planet. 20 of them have access to more than 1 terabyte of data. I was actually curious to know how many of you work with more than 1 terabyte of data. Good to see. Good to see this growing. So potentially we also have to think about infrastructures which don't run on a laptop anymore, but which really need cyber infrastructure, e-science. I thought I should use my 7 minutes to give you an overview of what scientometricians typically do, some recent progress in this area, but then also point you to infrastructures which potentially might be useful here, and then point out challenges. Talking about scientometrics, you might have a research question such as, is science today driven by prolific single experts or by high-impact co-authorship teams? So here we analyzed a data set. We actually had to develop a new approach to allocate citational credit, not to notes, but to actually see co-authorship weights. We came back with a novel weighted graph representation, tried to visualize the growth of weighted co-authorship networks, and working with physicists in this particular case, also looked at author-centered entropy measures, which were new to the field of scientometrics. And it's interesting that the question, the overall question can be answered that in this particular data set and using these methods, it seems to be really the case that science today is driven by effective collaborations. Another study, we asked, does space still matter in the internet age? So we used a 20-year PNAS data set to try to find out if people, as the amount of knowledge increases and as the internet comes into existence, do people now cite over larger distances? And it actually turns out that they don't do this. Instead, they actually cite over shorter and shorter distances. And I think one reason for this are the social networks which underlie all of our scholarly activity. And we oftentimes consider whom we have to face again at the next conference or in the hallway when we start filling out those references at the end of papers. In another study, we were very interested to know what are the current emerging trends, what are the highly bursting terms, and using the same PNAS publication data set, 82 to 2001, we tried to identify the 50 most highly bursting but also highly used terms, and those are mapped here as a core word network. And you also see a color coding going on where the circle size represents the burst weight, the circle color represents the burst onset, and the ring color represents the year of the maximum word count. And it's interesting to note that words typically burst first and then experience widespread usage. So it would be very interesting to now fold in 2002 to today data and see if growth and protein in models really experienced widespread usage. Some of you might have seen the exhibit outside. This is an effort to communicate to the general public, but also to other ivory towers, that you can not only map our planet, but also our collective scholarly knowledge. This exhibit is a 10-year, 10-iteration effort. The first iteration was all on the power of maps to map geospatial spaces, but also knowledge spaces. And as you will see out in the hallway, these are 6 very different metaphors which are used to map what we collectively know. The second year tried to emphasize the importance of reference systems. How many dimensions do you need to communicate science? Is it just time going by? Is it 2-dimensional? Is it geospatial reference system? Which might work best? And many sciences have battled to agree on a way to depict, for instance, the periodic table of elements, or to agree on a reference system which works for astronomy. But after they had this reference system, they could point to any segment in the sky and retrieve all data, all modeling results, all observations ever made there. Wouldn't it be nice to have something like this for science? And we don't claim that we have the answers, but we would like people to think about this. The third year was all on the power of forecasts. What can we learn from forecasting of epidemics, of seismic hazards, from economic models, to the forecasting of science? What can we do and what can we not do, given the data we have, given the models we have? following our 6 years where we produce maps of science for very specific user groups, we believe that these science analysis and resulting communications of results are very specific, and they have to be specifically tailored to the needs of different user groups. And we see economic decision makers, science policy makers, scholars, but also data providers as major users. We also see children as major users, which need to understand how science interlinks, why it is important to learn math to succeed in other sciences. And I believe it will be very possible to generate forecasts of science based on streaming data in just a few years out. The last iteration is on how to live with science maps, which is very doable. This exhibit has a physical instantiation, which is actually now at, in Canada, in China, and at the National Science Foundation, and there's a new iteration going through Europe starting this December. As part of this exhibit, you have the so-called illuminated diagram display, where you have a large-scale map of science printed in 300 dpi with lots of details, and a map of the world. And you have a touch panel display where you can select any place on the map of science, and in the map of the world you see who is conducting this kind of research. This is all based on ISI data. Ideally, you would also fold in Scopus data and patent data and funding data, etc. Right now, it's purely based on ISI, Thomson Scientific data. You can also select any place on the map of the world, and you will see what kind of research they conduct. So by holding down 2 fingers, potentially, you could compare 2 institutes, 2 countries, etc. And there are different instantiations of this, either back illuminated or illuminated from the front using projectors. Thanks to NSF, James McDonald, and NIH funding, there are now a number of infrastructures which you can use to do Scientometrics research on larger scale data sets. There is the scholarly database at Indiana University, which now has 20 million scholarly records, which is added another data set, and which is freely available. You can search for John Smith. You will get all John Smiths, which have patents and publications and grants. So this is cross-searching Medline, USPTO, NSF, and NIH funding. If you type in nano, you will get nano-relevant records across the different databases. If you download it in dump, you get 4 different formats, because all these 4 different databases have very different formats. You have the information visualization cyber infrastructure, which helps you to visualize data sets. The network workbench is actually a unique collaboration between physicists, social scientists, biologists, scientometricians, to create our dream tool, which we need for our research on networks. And there's now a new set of Scientometrics plugins, which reads also data from Google Scholar, reads also personal bibliography files, which I think are underused, because they actually have the knowledge on what people draw from and what they provide as output and generate as output if you look at the self-citations in there. And there's a new NIH-funded epidemic cyber infrastructure, which is designed to study social contagion, but also large-scale flu, SARS epidemics models. However, you can also use and abuse this infrastructure, if you wish, to study knowledge and information and innovation diffusion. And this was just awarded, so we are in the process of doing requirements analysis. There are a number of review articles, so you might see the exhibit out there and saying, oh, these are all pictures. There is maybe no formula involved, but in fact there are large bodies of review articles in this domain which have all the formulas you can dream and wish for. I was asked to also point out challenges I see, and these are the main ones which I think we will have to address. First of all, different user groups, be it campus level officials, science policymakers, or program officers, or division directors, or OMB, these different levels have very, very different needs in terms of what they need to understand about the science system and how they would communicate it. We need to get better definitions of what we mean by impact, interdisciplinarity, etc. Ideally, we can also operationalize these terms, especially if we now are trying to collaborate across disciplinary boundaries. We need standard data sets, and I think this was already mentioned today. And ideally, they can be used by anybody who, for instance, gets a funding in this particular research area. They automatically gain access to those data sets, and they do not have to spend 80% of their budget to clean this data yet again. It's a very stupid job. You don't want to do this often. You need ideally a cyber infrastructure which you can use as a portal to data sets and algorithms which are relevant. And we need well-documented case studies and evaluation. And then ideally there would be a Wikipedia kind of environment where you can track major results, good practices, new data sets and tools, so that everybody can have access to this, be it the small agencies which doesn't have the resources to actually provide funding for their own science of science research, or a researcher like me who also needs to monitor what is going on in science. I would like to also point out that science of science studies can augment but never ever replace human judgment. I see it as a calculator. You don't want to compute large numbers in your head. You want to have a tool to do this. Incomplete, low coverage data typically results in low quality results. So trash in, garbage out. And studies performed using proprietary tools or proprietary data are really, really hard or impossible to replicate. And you want replicability because major decisions will depend on what you do. Thank you.